From your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. This week, I'm sharing an interview I did with former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. We sat down at Barnes & Noble in Peoria to discuss his memoir, Seeking Bipartisanship. We started by talking about how he became close with the Obama administration through his friendship with Rahm Emanuel.
But he was a congressman from Chicago at the time, and he and I became friends, and we worked together. And we did a lot of bipartisan activities together. Bipartisan dinners, bipartisan legislation, trying to help Chicago, but he trying to help downstate Illinois. And after Senator Obama got elected to the United States Senate, he and I became friends. He is not someone that I really knew, but we became friends and worked in the delegation and did things to help Illinois. And so while he was running for president, after I had made my announcement, I ran into Senator Obama in the Capitol, and he says to me, "What are you going to be doing after you leave Congress?" I said, "I really don't know," and I didn't. He said, "Well, if this works out for me, I'm going to be looking for some Republicans to serve in my administration." And I didn't think much of that, but it goes along with what I believe is his bipartisan nature and the fact that he did want to include Republicans. And then Rahm and I talked about the fact that he was going to be intimately involved as after the president was elected as his chief of staff, and obviously events unfolded where after the election Rahm and I talked. We talked about me being involved. I went for an interview with then President-elect Obama on a very cold day in December, and he offered me the position of Secretary of Transportation. And it really, for me, again, it was one of the best jobs I ever had. Being in Congress is a good job. You can get a lot of good things done. You can help a lot of people. But being in the administration, you can make a difference too, and we talk about it in the book. Are we sitting close enough to the mic?
This is fine.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, Seeking Bipartisanship, the title of your book. Obviously, bipartisanship is a major theme in the book. You talked just now about President Obama and reaching out and your relationship with Rahm Emanuel, and in the book you talk about your relationship with Senator Durbin. But when you came to Congress and Republicans took over the House, initially bipartisanship was the last.
It was pretty hard to find, and it was hard to find because Democrats were mad that they got thrown out of the majority after 40 years. Newt became Speaker, and you know he was very controversial. Bill Clinton was in the White House, and so there was this real tension. Plus Gingrich had this contract with America, 10 items that he said we're going to vote on within the first 100 days, and we did, and all of them passed, and it was like a real poke in the eye. Rather than taking up other legislation, the 10 items were the first thing that we took up. And so there was a lot of tension. And some Democrats came to me knowing that I was considered a bipartisan person, having worked for Bob Michel, and asked me if I would co-chair a bipartisan retreat where we'd get Republicans and Democrats together to get to know one another better. And I did that. And our first bipartisan retreat, we had over 200 congressmen and women, over 150 spouses, over 100 children, and it was the first time that these people had ever been together and really meeting one another and getting to know one another. In politics, and those of you that are involved in politics know this, if you know somebody, it's much more difficult to criticize them. And much more difficult, you can have your differences, but you don't, use these harsh words that we kind of see being played out today in our politics. So our bipartisan retreats, which I co-chaired for, I think were effective in people getting to know one another, working together. Look, in Congress, the only way anything important or big gets done is when all people work together. You look at the big legislations that have been passed in our country in the 236 years, it's been done in a bipartisan way. Even when Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House, very liberal Democrat from Boston, Ronald Reagan was in the White House for 8 years. He and Reagan didn't agree on much of anything. The one thing they agreed on is they had to work together to solve the country's problems. And that is the way our process works. You think about Everett Dirksen. 50 years ago, he worked with President Johnson, a liberal president, Democrat from Texas. The two of them helped pass civil rights legislation. And here, Everett Dirksen's from Pekin, Illinois, an all-white community. And yet he set aside that for the good of the country and worked in a bipartisan way.
When we come back, we'll hear more from former Secretary of Transportation and ex-Congressman Ray LaHood. You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome back. We pick up our conversation with former Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood with what he had to say about the barriers to bipartisanship in Washington.
I think what's missing is that when I got elected to Congress in '94, we came into the majority, and there were 73 new Republican House members and 13 Democrats. That's a big number. Many of these Republicans got elected on a reform agenda, but they also believed in the job that they were getting elected to. Unfortunately, today, we have the Tea Party members, of which there are about 40 in the House, and a handful in the Senate, maybe 6 or 10. They don't believe in government. They ran against government. They vote no on everything. They shut down the government last year. They ran Boehner out of the speakership. So you got to have people elected to a job that believe in the job, that believe in their ability to solve problems. This is the only profession, politics, where you have people running against the job that ultimately they might get elected to. Now, look at when you went for your first interview, you wanted to make an impression on people, whether it was teaching or whatever it was. These people run for these jobs, decrying Congress, decrying Washington, everything's wrong, and then they think they're going to go there and actually get something done in a job they don't believe in. It's kind of a weird system we have right now.
So how do you convince voters that that's not going to get anything done? How does that change?
The voters get it. The reason that Congress is at 7 or 8% popularity is because they haven't done anything. And eventually people are going to get fed up with that. People want their elected officials to solve problems. There's not a person probably in this room that can do their own taxes. It's too complicated. We need tax reform. We have 12 million, maybe more, people living here illegally. We need immigration reform. We need better roads and better bridges. We need a transportation bill. The list goes on of things that the Congress hasn't done. And eventually, people around the country understand that they need to elect people who are going to get things done, who are going to put Americans to work, get our economy moving, fix our very complicated tax code, fix up our roads. I believe that we have the best system in the world, and the people almost always get it right. And eventually, if Congress continues as a do-nothing Congress, the people are going to throw them out of office.
When we come back, we'll hear more from former Secretary of Transportation and former Congressman Ray LaHood. You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome back. We continue the conversation with Secretary LaHood with a question about the relationships within a state's congressional delegation.
It seemed your relationship with Dennis Hastert was good, but when you attempted to be a part of the leadership, you didn't get the strong support, which you, go ahead. I mean,
well, look, what Paul is asking about is our delegation in Illinois was made up of Republicans and Democrats. And we were proud when Denny Hastert was elected Speaker because he was from Illinois. Even the Democrats were proud of that. And we'd meet, Senator Durbin would have meetings in his office of the Republicans, Democrats, and we'd talk about how we could work for Illinois. And we did. And part of the reason that perhaps I didn't rise in the leadership the way that I would have wanted was because I was too independent-minded. I didn't always go with the flow, so to speak. And I think people in my district appreciated the fact that I did what I thought was right for my district and for Illinois and for the country. And that doesn't hold you in very good stead with the leadership.
Interestingly enough, though, you voted about 90% of the time in support of Republican policies.
Yeah, back in the day that when I was there, the litmus test was pure loyalty. I don't want to say 100%, but I paid a price for not signing the contract with America. I paid a price for, going against the leadership from time to time. And that's just the way it works. And as long as you understand that, then, it's the way it works.
Of course, any member of Congress, you represent a very sizable area, not just geographically, but the number of people, and you get a lot of correspondence, you get a lot of requests. Can you kind of talk about what maybe the day-to-day, because when people are at home, they can watch TV and see members of Congress on the
Right.
floor, but they don't always know because maybe they haven't had to reach out to their congressman.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Well, the 18th district, which is our district, is 20 counties. And when you get outside of Peoria, Tazewell, it's a agricultural district, primarily farmers who grow corn and beans. When I started in the 90s, there were still a lot of hog farmers, but when the prices went south, then they lost their shirts and they got out of it. So we have a lot of agriculture, and our district is a fairly conservative district, and people who what they really want is they want their politicians to be honest with them, to tell them the truth, to do what's right, to vote the district, and so the number one job of a congressperson is voting. That's their number one. That's why they get elected. That's why people elect a congressman, to go to Washington and cast a vote. But then when you come back home, people want you to come to their baptism and confirmations and bar mitzvahs and have coffee with them and sit in the coffee shops, and they want to see their congressperson. And when you have 20 counties, as I did, as Darren does now, there's a lot of traveling, a lot of county fairs, a lot of corn dogs, a lot of elephant ears, and but it's a good job. The 18th district is a very good district because of the people that, just hardworking people, concerned about their families, concerned about their jobs, concerns their kids or grandchildren are getting a good education. And it's not that complicated, but you have to be available. Showing up is 80% of the job.
After the break, we'll hear more from Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood. You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
You're watching Central Illinois on the record.
Welcome back, continuing our conversation with former Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood. Now, I asked him about the election of his son Darren to Congress and the wisdom he shared with Darren as Darren headed off to Washington.
Well, what I tell people is that Darren watched me while I was when I was campaigning and while I was a congressman. And the thing that I'm proud of is that he knows how hard a job it is, how much work it is, particularly with a younger family. And he was willing to step across the precipice and do it. And I'm proud of him for doing that. He worked very hard. He earned every vote. And I think he'll be a good, hard-working member of Congress. Vote the right way in D.C. and come back here and go to all the things that I just talked about.
A lot of corn dogs and
right.
elephant ears. You mentioned that this 18th congressional district is a conservative district, and a lot of political observers say your son is more conservative than you. Did he evolve maybe with the district from where it was when you were a congressman?
Well, I think what people sort of misunderstand is because I got along with people. I work with people on both sides of the aisle. I have a lot of Democratic friends and a lot of Republican friends. People sort of mistake that as being moderate. If you look at my voting record, very conservative, but which I think is a reflection of the people that live in our district. Very business oriented, but I also had a lot of friends in the unions, particularly the building trades, because of the jobs that were created from some of the projects we worked on.
Well, there are a lot of union jobs in Central Illinois.
That's correct, and they deserve representation too. So I think Darren is more conservative, but you have to remember that he had a Tea Party candidate running against him, and he won with 70% of the vote.
When we return, we'll hear more from the former Secretary of Transportation. You're watching Central Illinois on the record. Welcome back. Wrapping up my talk with former Congressman Ray LaHood. I asked about his time at the Department of Transportation.
When we took the job, in '09, President Obama was focusing on the two things, the economy and the war. He told the American people he was going to get America out of Iraq. But the economy was so bad, unemployment was so high, banks were failing, The real estate market was terrible. The automobile industry in Michigan and Ohio was going under. So their goal, number one goal, we got to get the economy moving again. And what his economic advisors recommended to him was a big package of money for banks, for the automobile industry, to try and get people to work. So it ended up being $870 billion economic stimulus, which very much criticized, very much decried. Now you have to remember, in '09, when Obama comes in, he's got Democrats controlling the House, Democrats controlling the Senate. And even though Rahm Emanuel and even though the president tried to reach out to Republicans to test their temperature on how they would vote on these things, they made a decision that they didn't need their votes. And they made a decision that they could pass this legislation with just Democrats. And politically, Republicans were really turned off by that they weren't included in the legislation. They weren't included as a part of the opportunity to vote for these bills. And the bill passed with just Democratic votes. And the second big controversial piece of legislation that's been much decried and criticized is Obamacare. Again, passed almost completely with Democratic votes. And again, Republicans felt they were shut out. And after the 2-year period, after passing $870 billion worth of stimulus and Obamacare, Republicans took over the majority in the House of Representatives. And been a difficult time ever since. But it seems as though Obamacare is working to this extent. People who had no health insurance, people who were thrown off their health insurance because they had a condition like cancer or something that was running up the bills, people who had children who were turning 18 were getting thrown off of their insurance. All of this was incorporated into Obamacare, and now there are many Americans who do have health care, who do have pre-existing conditions, and it is affordable. As far as the economic stimulus, our economy is not perfect, but it's doing a lot better. Unemployment has come way down, the automobile industry is booming, people are buying cars, and so, you know, I think Obama's legacy, certainly on the domestic side, will be the economic stimulus, getting the economy moving in the right direction, and Obamacare. And I know there are a number of you that don't like it, but there are also millions of Americans who have health care today that didn't have it before that bill was passed. And then getting out of Iraq, which obviously we're back in Iraq, but not to the extent we were when President Obama came in '09. Those three things were will be his hallmark achievements.
Finally, in last week's show, a story we reported about the Sanders campaign's fight with the Democratic National Committee about access to voter information was resolved after our show was recorded and before it aired. We regret the error. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. You can stay in touch with us using social media. Connect with WMBD and me on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.